Keeping a rigid, stiff foot in a tripod position, particularly during a squat, creates excessive torque at the knees, the hips, and the low back, and can eventually lead to other issues. If you've ever watched Squat University's content, or even somebody like AthleanX, they often preach the idea of creating a tripod foot or a rigid foot for the sense of stability during a squat. And so neurologically, this makes sense. Creating a rigid foot or even gripping the ground with your feet as you squat creates more tension through the body and gives you a false sense of neurologic stiffness, neurologic stability, and can even make you feel stronger as you squat. But today, let's look at the biomechanics and let's break that down and actually look at why this is terrible advice. So squatting requires that the shin travels over the toes, a position of the ankle known as dorsiflexion. So every time we squat, that shin needs to travel over that heel and go forward closer to the toes, as you can see there. In order for the foot to do that, our foot is a masterpiece of engineering. We have a ton of joints. There are two positions of the foot that people are most aware of. One is a supinated position, where we have this rigid tripod foot, and one is pronation, where the midfoot hits the ground. And we need both during a walking cycle. And so typically, we hit the ground with a rigid foot, the rear foot will turn out so that the midfoot can collapse, and this allows the forefoot to splay. And the reason that that occurs is two things. One is this unlocks the ability for the shin to travel forward towards the toes. Secondarily, it unlocks the forefoot to become pliable, and this is how our foot adapted against uneven terrain. This is how we navigate uneven terrain. The ability for me to get over a leg and a foot, the foot to splay out to become pliable, and then it will become rigid again as I push off that big toe and get onto my other leg. If, for whatever reason, I am squatting and I'm creating this rigidity in the foot and blocking the ability for this shin to move forward in space, I now have to create that motion somewhere else, and it's gonna come from the knees, the hips, and the low back. If my shin cannot go forward over my toes, I'm gonna find that movement somewhere else. I'm gonna find that motion somewhere else. And I'm gonna end up going into a more knees out position. And after I hit a certain depth, I run out of space in my hips. And if I wanna go into more external rotation of my hips, technically this is shoving my pelvis even more forward in space and subsequently compressing my lumbar spine even more. The more that I pattern myself into this knees out, rigid foot position, I'm creating too much torque and starting to blow through some of the ligamentous structures in the hip and in the pelvic complex, and potentially leading to issues anywhere down the line. The next time you're squatting, try to allow your foot to feel the ground a little bit more. Relax that foot, allow the shin to travel forward over the toes instead of shoving those knees outwards. We're trying to create that rigid lever and see how much smoother that feels on your hips and on your low back and even on your knees. Tag a friend below who watches too much of Squat University's content and could benefit from this advice. Thanks for tuning in.